My name is Tom Summers, and I'm the Cultural Resource Manager for Delaware State Parks, a division within the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, better known as DENREC. This is the Rosedale Beach public boat ramp located on Indian River Bay near Millsboro, Delaware. Maintained by DENREC's Division of Fish and Wildlife, this boat ramp is used annually by hundreds of Delawareans and out-of-state visitors. Most of these people don't realize they are standing next to a site that used to be a historic resort during the 20th century. Now the location of the Gull Point apartment complex, Rosedale Beach has a rich history that needs to be shared. Joining us today is Tamara Burks, author of the Rosedale Beach History Project. We'll also be hearing from individuals who will be sharing their memories of Rosedale Beach. Tamara, thanks for joining us today. You've written a history of the Rosedale Beach. Can you tell us a little bit about the early history of the site?
Rosedale Beach was actually a place of leisure for people of color since the 1800s. The site was first known as Harmon's Park, and it was owned by Isaac and Sarah Harmon, and then it was known as Noah's Park and then Rosedale Beach. So Rosedale Beach was actually incorporated as the Rosedale Beach Hotel and Resort in 1937 by Jesse and Joffrey Voss. And people actually traveled to Rosedale Beach from points all along the East Coast to vacation here for the day, the week, or the summer, to enjoy top-of-the-line entertainment such as swimming, baseball games, church picnics, and even college students came to Rosedale Beach during their spring break. So Rosedale Beach was actually their Fort Lauderdale.
Well, why did people of color come to Rosedale Beach instead of going to more traditional sites such as Lewis or Rehoboth Beach or Dewey Beach even?
Well, due to segregation practices and policies in America, people of color of a variety of backgrounds were barred from frequenting many of the public facilities such as hotels, restaurants, travel facilities. They could only go to the beaches on certain days of the week. So they had to actually create their own venues and travel in places of leisure. And this was the case with Rosedale Beach when they were transformed to a major vacation destination along the East Coast. But at the same time, one of the interesting things about Rosedale Beach was that they had an outside pavilion that we're standing on now that was actually where bands used to play. So anybody that sailed by or got close enough to the pavilion could enjoy and hear the music coming from the resort.
Well, Tamara, tell me a little bit about the Green Book. Some of us have seen the movie, but could you give us a little bit of background about the Green Book, please?
Sure. The Green Book was actually created in 1936 by Victor Hugo Green, who was a retired postal worker. And it was a travel guide for African Americans that included safe places to visit throughout the U.S. and eventually include all 50 states. And this book would have been vitally important to keep African American families safe during the Jim Crow era. And I personally had never heard of the Green Book because in my family and my community, we knew about what was called the Chitlin Circuit, where it was a word-of-mouth network where anybody, any places that were hotels, restaurants, travel facilities, you could hear about it, through the word of mouth. And because these places were not written down anywhere, they probably became even safer places to go.
Rosedale has been seen as a recreation and entertainment destination for people of color. Was it a family resort?
Well, Rosedale Beach was a great American cultural institution, an icon of itself. And I was amazed to come across the various advertisements and articles that were ran in the National Billboard magazine describing the famous and hugely popular shows that were performed here. And when I examined the original incorporation documents that were filed by Jesse and Joffrey Voss, I was even more amazed at the awesome vision and plans that the Voss family had for the resort. So along with the hotel, the resort once featured a boardwalk, a picnic area, a beachfront area, a campground, an amusement park, and a baseball diamond. Some of the other intended purposes for the site were to include a hall for assemblies, musical programs, lectures, other social programs they wanted to have. They also wanted to build a museum where they can feature scientific exhibits and other types of exhibits. They even wanted to eventually build a library, a restaurant, and a cafe business.
You've mentioned entertainment here a couple times. Now, would there be any entertainers that came here to perform at Rosedale who we would know about? Anybody famous?
Sure. If you've heard of Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, James Brown, Cab Calloway, Ray Charles, Aretha Franklin, Jackie Wilson, and many, many more. But one of my favorite artists that would have performed here at Rosedale Beach would have been the megastar Sam Cooke. And his signature song, A Change Is Gonna Come, became an inspirational theme song while working on this amazing project.
How did they get such great entertainers to come down here to the area of Millsboro?
Well, Rosedale Beach had an artist management team made up of Jesse Voss and his brother Floyd, And they had an amazing ability to bring in the best of the best entertainment down to Millsboro, Delaware. And Jesse Voss was a driven Renaissance man, and he excelled at anything that he did. So he also did not leave the success of his business to chance. So he brought in bus tours from the city of Philadelphia. He spent money on advertising. He engaged major publications to write stories on the show that were performed here.
Okay. And how did he spread the word about all the great performers who were coming here? How did the word get out to the people that were local and the people in the region to come to these shows?
Sure, through word of mouth, through attractive posters that were advertised in the shows people would see, also through the radio, and through major publications and local publications. They were finding about the shows that were coming.
Okay. We're here on the site of Rosedale Beach, of the resort itself. Can you tell me where the stage was, where the hotel was, where the playground may have been located?
Well, the hotel would have been behind us, facing that way, facing the beach area, and then all the other outside areas, amusement park, baseball diamond, would have been around the hotel.
Okay. Now, I understand that although it was a segregated resort, that a lot of whites actually came to see entertainers here as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I found that when I was working on the Rosedale Beach Historic Marker, I found that people of all backgrounds always found a way to enjoy the music here at Rosedale Beach. And so when we had our marker ceremony, there was a retired state police officer that came and told a story about how he was sent down to Rosedale Beach on a raid. And he said, once I got inside, all I saw people were enjoying themselves and having a good time. So I sat down and had a good time myself.
Tamara, I got to ask you, what inspired you to do the research on this area?
My father, Leroy Jubilee, actually told me the stories about Rosedale Beach when I was a little girl. He told me that people of color had their own beaches where they could go swimming and have picnics. He said famous artists used to come to Rosedale Beach to perform. And I never forgot those stories, so that later on, when I was working on a music history project with Delaware State Museums, I became inspired to look further into the history of Rosedale Beach.
Okay. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the historical marker that is here, and that's a project you worked on in 2010 with the Delaware Public Archives. Can you tell us a little bit about that event?
Sure. Initially, I could find few records about the existence of Rosedale Beach, and when you're trying to research a part of history with very little information or fragmented information, you have to start asking yourself questions. So I wanted to know how rare Rosedale Beach was as a resort. And they were rare based on the scale in which they operated, bringing in people, publicity, and entertainment from a variety of different places. And in about 2009, I came across the original incorporation documents at the Division of Corporations. I then began to collect oral histories from my father and other individuals, and then I put together a history of Rosedale Beach, which I presented to the Delaware Public Archives. And then the project was approved, was sent over to the Delaware Public Legislature. And then eventually I started to petition the legislature to appropriate funding for the marker. And then the marker funding was approved. The placement of the marker was approved. And the marker was actually placed on the site 10 years ago this year, 2021. And the marker would have been placed in what would have been the original driveway that led to the hotel. And the pavilion we're standing on where the bands used to play is still here. And in my opinion, this is one of the most beautiful places in America.
Mrs. Paskins, you grew up in the town of Rehoboth, so you're fairly close to Rosedale Beach. Can you tell me what some of your earliest memories were of Rosedale Beach?
Well, I remember, first of all, coming here as a child. My aunt and uncle would bring us here for like picnics. And as I grew older, I realized that it was a great place to be, to hear, the great music and all.
And what time period are we talking about that you were coming here as a child?
Well, as a child, I was probably between 5 and 10 years old. That was probably in the late 40s, early 50s as a child.
Okay. And when you came here, not just as a child, but as an adult too, did you see some really fantastic performers that were here at Rosedale?
Oh yes. They were great. One of my favorite ones was Lord Price. Probably the last act I saw was Patti LaBelle, and it was then the Bluebells. And that was one of the only acts that I remember seeing inside the hotel. The other ones were always out, on the grounds. Mm-hmm. But it was a wonderful time. and the music. We didn't know how to appreciate that music then. We enjoyed it, but we didn't know how to appreciate it. But we sure do appreciate it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that even though it was a segregated resort, there were a number of whites that actually came and enjoyed the shows here as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can, just a little. I remember that whites were not, they tend to be a little hesitant about coming up, to the front of the stage or wherever the performer was. But there were whites that came, and we all had a good time together. I don't remember incidents then, but we all had a good time together.
Okay. Right. Are there any other memories of Rosedale Beach that you'd like to share with us that really stand out in your memory?
Well, I remember every year we would come down here for one reason or another to just enjoy the grounds for picnics. I remember coming down here when I was, first married with my boyfriend and that type of thing. So it was just a great place to be. I remember the old hotel. I didn't realize, and we very rarely went inside the hotel during that time. Most of the acts were outside during the summer. But I remember the old hotel and the how people would come and go, and that always fascinated me because I just thought it was one of the grand hotels in the area.
Mrs. Paskins, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing our memories of Rosedale Beach with us. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad I could do it, and I hope the memories last on and on and on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Leroy Jubilee to our filming tonight. We're going to be talking about Rosedale Beach, so we really appreciate you coming out to talk about your memories of Rosedale.
Thank you.
First question I'd like to ask you is, how old were you when you first visited Rosedale? What time period are we talking about?
Well, I was, when I first started to recognize the aspects of Rosedale Beach, I was about 10, I guess, when my friends and I would ride to the beach on our bikes on a weekday, and we would swim and crab, but it was a different story. Came the weekend, which is when all the entertainment started.
Okay.
And my friends and I, not having a lot of money, we would try to get in around the shoreline, to see the performance. Of course, we get caught and whatnot. And but there was quite a few well-known black entertainers that could not perform in other venues, so they came to Rosedale Beach, tiny Rosedale Beach.
I've heard tales about how bad the jellyfish were down at Rosedale Beach.
Very bad, but they were much smaller than they are now. The evolution of the jellyfish is something else, because they were like maybe the size of a cracked egg or something, but now they're humongous.
Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
Jellyfish, but you either put up with that or you stayed home.
Oh, okay. All right. Was it a crowded resort, especially on the weekends?
The resort was very crowded in the summertime. As you can imagine, people converging from all over the East Coast and further, because they couldn't go anywhere else. And the entertainment was first class.
So was the resort actually open during the winter months at all, or did it close down?
Open, but on a limited basis. It wasn't conducive for families or whatever. They had this little place where they would go and drink beer or whatever. And
Well, what are some of your fondest memories of Rosedale Beach, thinking back on it?
Fondest memories were, like, of course, the entertainers, and also we had baseball there. There were a lot of community baseball teams that of very talented players that the pros weren't available to them at the time. they would come to Rosedale Beach. And I remember one game that I saw. It was this pitcher from the Eastern Shore of Virginia by the name of Mapp, M-A-P-P. When he pitched, his outfield sat down.
Really?
Yes, I watched that. This wasn't hearsay. I watched it happen. And he was that good, but he never made it to the pros.
Okay.
You know, and also sometimes you would have the carnival-like situation where we had that swings and horse, you know, and you had this entertainer called Rattlesnake Bill. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
I've not heard of Rattlesnake Bill. Tell me a little bit about him.
Well, he would bring his wagon full of medications and snakes, and he would perform with his snakes and whatever. But then he would sell this snake oil. And I said, well, the snake oil will cure anything that's wrong with you. I don't know if Reba can attest to that or not. And that was part of the entertainment, you know, and of the whole venue. And again, we got to see just everybody, every performer that was worth his salt came to Rosedale Beach to perform.
Now, what I understand there's a story that you have about James Brown. Could you tell that to us, please?
Well, he was due to perform. I think it was around maybe 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock, whatever. So everybody was wondering. It was a tremendous crowd. Everybody was wondering, where is James Brown? You know. So after a while, the crowd got uneasy and it started moving towards the gate. You know, of course, I went the other way. You know, and they were going to demand their money back. And just about that time, the bus came to the gate. He had been stopped by the Delaware State Troopers.
Oh, okay.
You know,
you mentioned it was 2 o'clock for the show. So was there a matinee show when these shows took place?
Well, sometimes they would have an opening performance, and but he was to perform at this certain time. You know, in other words, James Brown, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever, and the people waited for an hour. And said, well, where is he? You know, so. I didn't want to get in trouble. I was not going to be a part of any trouble, so I made a beeline. So
they performed not only in the afternoon, but they did some evening shows as well.
Evening shows, and of course, at the late evening shows, the kids were mostly gone, but you know, and we had to. The transportation wasn't that well. It was that good, so you had to. Maybe if your ride was leaving, you had to go. You know.
Okay.
Yeah, but the adults, a lot of them stayed. They were driving cars. You know, and as you know, Millsboro, Rosedale is considered to be Millsboro, but it wasn't actually in Millsboro proper. You know, and you had to have the adequate transportation to get there. It wasn't like you catch the bus and come in. You know, it was you had somebody had to take you there.
Now, how did you hear about shows? How did you know James Brown was coming in? Was it in the paper
there
or
was
on the radio?
There was a radio station in Maryland, Annapolis, Maryland, and which was black oriented, and Hoppy Adams was the host. And he would always announce what was going on in Rosedale Beach, you know, and so that's how the news got out, who was coming, you know. And they would also have billboards, plaques, or whatever, on different buildings or trees or something, and to know what was going on. We didn't have the advantage of the computer, you know, generated information like we have now, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, but the word always got out. There was always a crowd there.
And let me ask you, how much were the tickets to get into a show?
Oh,
with James Brown.
Well, $5 was a big deal back in the early '60s, you know, whatever. And but the performers, they really put on a good show. I remember one performance by Jackie Wilson. he was attacked at another venue in Detroit, and some lady like stabbed him with some scissors or whatever, and almost killed him. You know, but his first performance back was at Rosedale Beach.
Okay.
Right? And it was a big celebration there, and he was taking his jewelry off and throwing it in the crowds. So that was one of the performance that I really remember. And in my opinion, he was as good of a showman as James Brown was. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Your daughter has written an excellent history of the Rosedale Beach. What inspired you to share that information with your daughter and let her know how important it was?
Well, she and my son, I tried to, sometimes they said, what did you do? You know, whatever, you know. And you try to remember some positive aspects of your childhood. Of course, everything wasn't positive, but Rosedale was one of the big deals in my child growing up because, you know, and I told her, and she's very good. She's in her research, right? She loves that kind of research. So she took off from there, you know, and
well, she's done an excellent job, and you
yeah,
should be very, very proud of her.
Yes,
So
I am. Both of my kids, yes.
So, thank you, Leroy. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay.
Dr. Rebo Hollingsworth, I'd like to welcome you to our program, and thanks for taking the time to come talk to us about Rosedale Beach. And I've got some questions I'd like to ask you, and I'm going to kind of open it up, and you can share some memories. But we really do appreciate you taking the time to come talk with us about it.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Yes.
Oh, good. How old were you, Reba, when you first went to Rosedale Beach? And what time period are we talking about?
You're talking about the early 30s and 40s for me. We, of course, didn't have any transportation. The buses didn't run down there. So my dad used to have a truck, and he would put hay on the back of the truck and would take a bunch of the kids down to any of the beaches, whichever ones we could go to at the time.
And where did you grow up? Where would he be bringing you
I
down
grew
from?
up, born, bred, christened, and wed in Milford.
Okay.
So, yeah. I'm a Delawarean through and through. I mean, even on the map, I've got some relatives who have roads named after them in Kent County. But I didn't tell you that one before.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm an Delawarean.
So your father would load everybody up in the truck basically and take you down. That was kind of an experience in itself, wasn't it?
Well, he was like the father of the neighborhood, because he would do the same thing for the Harrington Fair. When kids didn't have any money, we could go over on what they call Children's Day, so nobody needed any money. And when we went to beaches, of course, we didn't need any money just to go to the beaches. And we'd go down there, and they would go clamming and crabbing and fishing and that kind of thing when there was no other activity there.
And how old were you at this point?
I guess I must have been, 8, 9, 10 years old.
Yes, you went down as a child.
A child, yeah. So, my grandfather and my dad's brothers and sisters would have family reunion the first weekend in August, and so they would come home from wherever they were, and the whole family would get together. We still do all get together the first weekend in August. And so we would go to the beach and then come back to my grandfather's house to have dinner and everything. So, yeah.
I've heard about so many great entertainers out at Rosedale. What was the first entertainer that you remember seeing down there?
Oh, goodness, I don't remember. I know Lionel Hampton. Almost all of the major entertainers would come there during the summers. And if you had enough money, you could go inside. If not, then you couldn't. One of the interesting things that I found about it is that a lot of the whites who lived in the area would not come into the beach area, but they would put their boats out on the Indian River, and people who lived in the area would get their lawn chairs out and sit on the banks and listen to the music rather than coming into the facility. But everybody would come if they could. For the entertainment. We didn't really realize, I guess at the time, how famous these people would eventually be, but some of them were already famous and would come down just to get a little extra money, I guess. So,
Were there any performers here besides African American performers?
Not that I knew of. There may have been some there, but it was really a black beach. And it's now, I understand, being taken over by the whites, but at that time it was where we went. That was the largest beach that we went to. We could go to Slaughter Beach, Bowers Beach, usually when in an area we'd go to South Bowers because the North Bowers was where the families lived. And you'd just go when your parents were able to take you, especially very hot weather in July and August. Kind of thing.
So when your family said we're going to the beach, you weren't thinking Lewis or Rehoboth?
No,
or
we would
Dewey.
just usually go wherever my dad would take us.
Okay.
So, yeah. So.
All right. So what you've actually told me before, who was your favorite entertainer at Rosedale?
Oh goodness, I don't know. All of them at the time were my favorite because I didn't know anybody else, and we always danced to all their music, and we always had the records for all of them. We played the Victrola at home, and so it was just a continuation of what we had learned at home because my dad taught us to dance and all that. So
Okay.
But
Now, did the entertainers down there inspire anybody in your family to be a musician?
well, my dad was already a musician. He played the
Oh.
clarinet, and one of my brothers actually had a band. He played all the saxophones, and so. But I don't think he was really inspired by the people at Rosedale Beach. It was just he was interested in music, and my dad had taught us to read music, and
Okay.
so we always played the flutes and those kind of things. But I never played one of the major instruments. But
Okay.
yeah,
Now was Rosedale a crowded resort on the weekends or on the weekdays?
the major holidays or if something was really going on or somebody was famous, it was crowded. But I remember we just went down there one day and my dad was crabbing and so forth, and my sister, who was next to me, reached for the crab line and fell into the river and actually almost drowned. They had to put her in BB Hospital. She had to stay there for a week.
Really?
And I remember that very well because we were all afraid that she wasn't going to make it, of course. And we might have been, I guess, 8, 10. Maybe
So that was the 1930s
in
then?
the 30s, yeah.
Okay.
But I remember that because it was our family that was really affected by that. But we'd go down and fish and get crabs and so forth. Clams, my dad had clams.
When you got older, like a teenager, early 20s, when you went down to Rosedale, it was a little bit different than when you were a child?
When I was a teenager at 14, I went down to Rehoboth to work. And Rehoboth, had a little segregated pavilion for blacks. I don't know whether you remember that or not, but there was a section at the end of the avenue, Rehoboth Avenue, going in there. And it was about as wide, I guess, as this house, maybe. And of course, the Atlantic Ocean flowed back and forth all over the beach, but we could only swim in that partition area. I just never liked doing things like that. So
Rosedale was kind of a refuge.
Rosedale, you knew you were welcome, but some of the other beaches, and I just never liked spending my money where I wasn't
Right.
appreciated.
Right.
Still don't, but anyway.
So did you see a lot of your friends down at Rosedale from Milford and from other areas?
They usually went with us. I mean,
Okay.
because my dad took the truck and everybody in the neighborhood would go. So,
Okay.
yeah. And of course, their parents sometimes would go with them, but most of the time they would trust my dad to take us all.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, the shows that you saw down there, did you see them during the day or at night, or did you spend?
Oh, it was during the day.
During the day.
We seldom stayed during at night, unless after we got older, if there was somebody we really wanted to see, we went down. But after I got grown, I was doing other things.
Okay. And how did you hear about the shows down there, being in Milford? I mean,
Well, we didn't have a radio and television and all that. We didn't have electricity, running water and all, but you always knew what was going on. So somebody would tell you.
word of mouth?
Word of mouth, or people with the newspaper. We always got the newspaper, and sometimes they were advertised there. But there were flyers that came out sometimes. People would let you know when things were going on.
So there was a type of communication that the word could get out about what was going on.
Yeah, everything you knew what was
Okay.
going on. Yeah.
Is there any other information you want to share with us about Rosedale or your time?
Well, the only
point
thing,
there?
that was where we went, and we felt comfortable there. When we went to Bowers Beach, Big Thursday, you would go, but you knew that this is where the whites were living, and they were not always receptive to our being there, unless you went, as I said, to South Bowers, where there were very few people there. But most of the time, the boys in the community would swim in Havens Lake in Milford, and we didn't go to the beach that much, but
Okay.
just the special occasions.
Now, what was the last time you remember actually going to Rosedale Beach when it was, you know, a resort for African Americans? Because, you know, after a while, after the beaches started to be integrated, what's your last?
Well, the
memories
last
of
time
that?
I can remember going is after I got married, and my husband and I went down there, I think on one occasion, but
And
it
what time
wasn't-
period was that?
Oh, I married in 1947,
Okay.
so it must have been early 50s, I guess. We moved down here to Dover actually in 57, so
So Rosedale was still kind of in its prime at that point.
yeah, it was. But,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
but I just, you know, it was a place to go, and we just did whatever we could do. But as I said, I grew up and I was grown at 14, and I never really lived home anymore except 1 year after I was 14. So I was working and trying to make a living, get an education, and that kind of thing. So
Well, what's your favorite memory of Rosedale?
being able to get out of Milford and go down, put on your bathing suit and go in. We didn't do a lot of bathing, like, because we were already tan, so we didn't need to stay in the sun all that much. And we could actually get tan in a short while, tanner in a short while. And so as an older person, you just didn't go out. I mean, I didn't anyway go out. I didn't want to melt. But anyway.
Dr. Hollingsworth, thank you for joining us today and
Okay.
talking about your memories at Rosedale Beach. We really do appreciate
Thank you.
it.
I'm sorry.
All right.
You know, I'll try to find some more pictures, but
You've done fine. We really
All
do
right.
appreciate it.
all right. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talking a little bit about Rosedale Beach, and both of you grew up in Millsboro itself. What did your parents tell you about Rosedale when you were kids?
We actually moved. We had a home in Millsboro for the winter, and in the summer months we had a place in Oak Orchard, actually at Rosedale. And we didn't know a whole lot about it until we moved in there, and then we found out that there was this huge hotel right up the road from us. But then later we found what was happening at the hotel with the entertainment and how active a facility that it was.
We had a summer place in Riverdale, and my mother's family had a summer place a generation before. And so she was familiar with the bands in the 30s that were playing in Rosedale. And she would tell me stories about, you know, the bands, and of course she was really a fan of the music. And so she would tell me stories about going up in the boats and watching. And so when I was, I'm going to say 7, 8, 9 years old, my dad would put us all in the boat, and we would go up there, anchor the boat, and listen to the bands. And so that was a big event, family event for us. And of course there would be other people, but that was back in the day of segregation. So it was mostly people of color who were on the beach or on the land, and it was mostly the white people in the boats. And we were all there for the same purpose, which was to enjoy the music.
How did you know what performer was going to be at Rosedale on what specific night and things like that?
I think, which was standard during that time, was they would put posters up on telephone poles. And so if you went to, driving around, when you came to a stop sign, there would always be a telephone pole there, and the posters would be on the telephone pole, and they would be posted probably about a month or so before the band was actually going to play. So you always knew who was coming up.
Okay. When you went to a show at Rosedale, and it was kind of obvious that the white people were in the boats and African American folks were actually at the resort itself. Did you have the feeling that there was going to be a change at some point? Or you say you went to school and you went to Rosedale during the 1960s. Did you feel that, think the times were changing?
I don't know that I can say I did. I don't think anybody really even thought about it at that point. We just didn't think about it. Everything seemed good, but yet, I mean, I realized it was different. Here's the white people out here and the people of color at the event. And it wasn't that we were not allowed to go. I mean, anyone was allowed to go to this event. It was not listed as a segregated event or anything. It was open to the public. From anything that I saw that I'm aware of.
I went to school in Media, Pennsylvania, which was an integrated school. And so Then when I came to Delaware, things were a little bit different because it was segregated. And so I just figured this is the way they do things here. Never, of course, I'm a kid too, you have to understand. And so I never really gave it much thought other than this was more or less like a party or an event that this group of people is having, and we're neighbors, but we're not necessarily invited, was how I was thinking at the time, which was fine because no one was upset that we were out there enjoying the music. And of course, we didn't have to pay either.
Yeah, right.
You
We
know,
were in it for free.
but we were out there in the boats, and the people of color were on the beach for the most part, and everything was okay, and everybody was happy. So, in terms of looking at it from a civil rights point of view, and all that would come later, as a kid, I never thought of it that way. You know, even though I went to an integrated school in Pennsylvania, it was just this place does things differently here. That's really how I saw it.
All right.
Yeah.
Like you said, we didn't really think about it.
No.
Nobody really thought about that situation.
Because there was no discontent. There was no discontent on either side, so
Right.
it wasn't an issue.
They didn't mind us being there. We didn't mind them being there. They didn't mind us being out there for
No.
free watching their shows. We weren't paying.
Now, Alan, you mentioned that you live fairly close to Rosedale. Did you see anything probably at Rosedale that maybe other people didn't see since you lived so close and you were there before and after the shows?
I don't know that I saw a lot. I saw people would come through our properties because they had a road into the hotel, and it was gated, and naturally that's where they collected their money for the shows and the concerts. But you see the tide line at the river is public access and public property, so we would have people run through our property, get down to the river so they could walk the river edge to go up to the hotel. Our house was only about four or five homes from the hotel itself. And another thing too that I really believe that it was pretty much all the time. The biggest events and biggest shows were on Sunday nights. Sunday night was the big night, not Saturday, but it was Sunday nights.
I think when I read up a little bit on this, and I think the reason for that is these bands were hired in by big name hotels in the Ocean City and the Rehoboth area, and so they were playing for that venue on Saturday night and Friday night, but they weren't playing there on Sunday night. So then they weren't allowed to stay in these hotels because they were of color, so they had to have a place to stay. So they stayed at Rosedale, but then they paid their rent by playing Sunday night. You know, okay. So and I can't verify that from the owner's point of view, but of the hotel. But that's what I was told. I remember being told that. Okay. You know, and so that's why it was Sunday night for us. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned a few of the people that you saw there. Can you kind of tell me now who all that you saw?
A little Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder.
I think he was at 12 years old, 12 maybe at the time.
That was 19.
Fingertips Part 1, playing his harmonica.
Yeah.
Chubby Checker was there. I can't remember whether or not I saw Fats Domino or not.
I think so.
I think he was there, but I just don't. I can't, swear that he was.
Yeah, I remember it was either 1963, which was when Fingertips was the big song, or 1964, right after. But he was there with the band, and it was an adult band, of course. He was the only kid there. Yeah. And I remember after he did the Fingertips song, and everybody's cheering, and it was like the big thing. And the leader of the band got up on the microphone, and it was just one of those moments in life you just never forget. And he says, of course, he's trying to pump up the applause, little Stevie Wonder, and he's, he said, he is a genius. He said, and mark my words, you will be hearing his name again. Yeah. And I remember sitting in that boat that time and thinking, well, maybe I will and maybe I won't, because you don't know at the time. Right. But of course, he turns out to be one of the most prolific entertainers that the country's ever had. So, but I do remember that. And he was just a skinny little kid up there, and he was playing his harmonica and his drums and singing a song.
And there could probably be at times as many as, I'm going to say 30, 40 boats up there. Out in front of the hotel, anchored, listening. Yeah. And partying. Yeah. They partied on the boats, Yeah. It was a big time. Good. It was a big thing. Sunday nights at Rosedale.
Yeah. It was fun. It was just good old-fashioned fun.
It was. Yeah. And never really any problems, issues.
Yeah.
We mentioned that earlier. Either way, anywhere. Never heard of any problems at the hotel either. Everything was very well behaved to everyone.
Alan, you mentioned before that you lived really close to Rosedale, and you mentioned there was a gentleman who was next door who Who made some money off of actually cleaning up afterwards? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Our homes were on the river, and there's a road right behind our homes, and then there was a big farm, and Tupsy lived in a farmhouse on the other side of the road, and he had a mule and an old wagon, and on Monday mornings after the big shows on Sunday night, he'd go up and haul off their garbage and their trash for them. So Tupsy, at that time I was maybe 10, 11 years old, and I'd gotten to know Tupsy, so he'd asked me if I'd like ride up to the hotel with him and help him. Of course, I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to help him haul the trash and the garbage, but I thought it was really cool riding on the wagon and going up to the hotel. And I actually got into the hotel, as you mentioned earlier with your real estate thing. But I actually got in, was in the ballroom. I remember seeing the ballroom. And I just remember at that time, like I said, 10, 11 years old, wow, this is a big room. And it was really fancy looking to me at that time. But all we did was went in, got the trash cans and loaded them on the wagon.
And who pulled the
Tupsy
wagon?
took care of it. The mule.
An old black mule, you said, yeah.
It was an old black mule, yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I don't remember her name. Tupsy called her by name, but yeah. She was a pretty good old mule.
And Myra, you mentioned, Alan mentioned about the real estate. You said you actually were in the hotel itself in the 1980s. Is that right?
1976.
1976, and I believe it was torn down not that many years after that, I believe.
Right.
Tell us a little bit what the hotel looked like to you at that point.
So the owners of the hotel called Jody Hudson, who was a realtor over in the Lewis area, and asked him to come over and give a price of what he thought it would sell for. And so he asked me if I wanted to come along and take notes for him. So I said, sure. So I went with him, and the owners were there, and they gave us a complete tour of the building. Now, I had seen it from the outside, and so I knew it was a big white building, and it had 2 floors with windows, which were obviously the rooms that they were renting out, and a big balcony off the 2nd floor. And the balcony is where the band was, which was perfect because everybody could see them, everybody could hear them, and so I really wanted to see what was behind that balcony. And so, of course, the 1st floor was the area that they had the ballroom.
The ballroom.
They also had an area in the front there where it was like a bandstand, but of course when they had the big acts, they were all up on the balcony, but that would be for other times. The ballroom floor, as I remember, it was hardwood. Do you remember that? It was a hardwood dance floor, which was like the thing back in the 30s and the 20s. And it had a bar over on this side, and of course it was a big, long bar. So, but the ballroom was the biggest thing. I mean, it was just huge. And so you could walk in there and you could just picture a band being on the bandstand or being upstairs and all the people in there dancing and partying. And it looked like a fun place. It would have been a fun place to be. And then, of course, you go upstairs, no elevators, it was stairs. And the 2nd floor was a long hallway, and of course the preferred rooms would be the ones that had a view of the river. So each room, it was small. Those rooms were like about 12 by 12. I mean, they were not big at all. Big enough for a double bed and the window, but no bathrooms in them. Remember, this was built back, I'm going to say in the 30s, I guess, or maybe before then, but it was a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway was one bathroom. And so all the guests on both sides of that hallway all shared that one bathroom. So that must have been, we look at it by today's standards, but I mean, but back in the day, they didn't expect anything different. I mean, that's how it was, And then I think there was a 3rd floor, but I think it was more like an attic type of thing. I don't think they had rooms for rent up there. But yeah, it was, you stand in it and you can see the deterioration that was happening because it hadn't been used for a while, but you could kind of picture in your mind what it was like when it was in its heyday, and it looked like it would have been, a really exciting place to be. Yeah.
Well, Alan and Myra, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you sharing your memories of Rosedale Beach with us.
All fond memories.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you,
you.
Tom.